What I'd like to do is invite Brian Bechtel, who's Executive Director of the Alberta Interagency Council on Homelessness and Program Policy Integration, Alberta Human Services, to come up and tell us a little bit more about the provincial context of the work that we're doing and what we're going to be talking about this afternoon and what we talked about this morning.
Thanks, Gary. I think, I know, Gary, you mentioned this morning that this is a bit of an experiment in terms of stimulating research, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's working, so I think we're liking it. I'm going to talk about research primarily from the perspective of the Alberta Interagency Council on Homelessness. So the IAC is a ministerially appointed, mandated body that was created not long after the 10-year plan was launched, and it was the successor to an earlier organizational structure, which was the Alberta Secretariat on Homelessness. So a successor to the Secretariat was the Interagency Council, which has just completed about 3 years of operation, and we have a 1-year extension, a 1-year mandate. The council is a very innovative design in terms of engaging all of the people and all the agencies and all the players that Councillor Henderson was talking about that need to be involved in homelessness. So there are municipal people, there are the community-based organizations to end homelessness are well represented, women's shelters. So a council, when at its full complement of about 32 people, right now we have about 26. So over the past 3 years, the IAC has made a number of recommendations to government that have addressed issues like the need for new investments in housing and supports, integration of housing and supports, and homelessness prevention, as well as specialized populations within the homeless population that need particular responses. One of those areas, well, we'll talk a bit more about what those are. For the future of the IAC, the IAC itself has made recommendations that for the future it really needs to broaden its scope to go beyond homelessness per se, but to also include housing. And I don't think I have to convince anybody here that dealing with any one of them, either one of those things in isolation is the way to go, and I think that's the learning. But the IAC is a really bold initiative, and Alberta's 10-year plan was all a really bold initiative. And as we said, we're learning now, we're continuing to go, but I still think we have the best in the country. I still think that we have the best supports. I still think we have the most investment. Yeah, we have things to learn. And further to Councillor Henderson's point, amazing things have been accomplished. And I spent the last 10 years up until September in Manitoba working on homelessness, and I'll tell you, we really do have a lot to be proud of. And I know I work for the government, I'm supposed to tell you it's all great, but it really is really good. And I said that before. Well, I guess that's helped me get the job. But Gary, you know that. First time I met you, I brought you to Winnipeg to tell us how to do stuff. So that's something that we've done. So we really have a lot to do, and we certainly do have challenges. There's no question. We have things, and we've unforeseen events like a boom and now a decline. Those things have a huge impact. The IAC will play a really key role, I believe, in helping to advise the new government on the direction of ending homelessness. So that's just a little background on the council. The council priority, I mentioned Aboriginal people, youth, seniors, women fleeing family violence. The priorities have been case management, sustainable strategies, and as well as prevention and moving into the root causes, closing that back door, as we just heard, and prevention of prevention. So in terms of research, the first initiative in Alberta was the Homelessness Research Consortium. Did I get that right, colleagues? Am I in the right zone? Yeah, thank you. Alberta Homelessness Research Consortium, which which functioned for a couple, yeah, good, yeah, which functioned for probably 2 or 3 years, I think, and produced some results, but it really wasn't seen to be quite the right direction. It wasn't quite delivering. So the next step was for the IAC, with funding from the provincial government, to partner with the Alberta Centre for Child, Family and Community Research, the ACCFCR, which we can thank as one of our sponsors here today. The research strategy was based on research targeted for practitioners, policymakers, some of the same targets that we heard this morning and Jenny was talking about from human services perspective. The ACCFCR has been the research application, the research instrument, if you will, for the IAC. Some of the research strategy priority topics have been homelessness prevention, early intervention, so what are the structural factors? And I should mention that the IAC has as its mandate a system response, so looking at the whole system. Yes, we have programs, Housing First programs that are delivered, but they really only can be effective if they operate within a complete system response. So that is the mandate of the IAC. Migration and employment have been issues of discussion, and of course gaps in systems of care and support, which we do have. It's not a complete, we haven't got it all covered, and identification of those at risk. And one of the factors that I think is in play is migration. I don't think we've talked about that yet today, but it is. People will gravitate. So even as Councillor Henderson said, there was X number of people homeless. There's migration. To some degree, Alberta has attracted people who have come because of the quality of services, and the major centres certainly do. So that's a factor we never really. I remember talking to homeless people in Winnipeg, and I overheard a conversation saying, "Go to Edmonton. It's way better there. The programs are there." So if they're hearing about it in Portage and Maine, you can bet they are in other places too. And that's not a bad thing. It's the Canadian experience, but it is true. It's true. Rural homelessness is an issue that we've covered, I see as research, coordinated planning, and community support and mobilization as well. Within that, we have 4 pillars of activity that these are the ACCFCR pillars: evaluation and monitoring, knowledge mobilization, data development and use, which I think we're talking about here today, and as well as primary research. And so it's a multifaceted approach, but it really all starts from data development and use. And I would echo people who've said before that we really have an amazing amount of data here in Alberta on homelessness. The people who set up this system were really visionaries, and who, as opposed to the norm in our sector where we start a project and 6 months before we have to do an evaluation, what are we going to do? The people who started this set it up right, and they laid in those provisions for data, and we have it. We have a lot. I would agree we haven't yet found the right ways to mobilize it, and we're a little short on analytics, but we have it, and it is an amazing resource for Alberta. In terms of one thing that we are initiating now with CCFCR is the data mapping of client-level data in 3 areas: Housing First, youth emergency shelters, adult emergency shelters, and we hope to ultimately be able to combine that into a housing kind of database as well. But for now, looking at those approaches, and you've heard some of my colleagues today talk about data mapping in terms of looking at what we have, what is robust, what's working, what are we doing with it, and then again, at the end of the day, what questions are we really answering with that data, and are we answering it well? Again, what we have is what reflects the best knowledge, the best thinking that was available 6, 7 years ago, but it's changed and it's evolved. So we need to look at that again, and again, not just for evaluation of programs and delivery, that's part of it, but also to better inform program policy development, which is the other half of our branch, the PPI branch at Human Services. So one of the things that we've done in ACCFCR has done with the IAC include looking at NIMBYism as a barrier to housing development. I think Alberta has had some some challenges in terms of just even when there is funding for new housing projects targeted to specialized populations, there are community reactions and responses which can really derail the whole process. So we've undertaken some research, we haven't completed it yet, but saying what are the best responses? How do you take into account NIMBY in the planning process, for example? Do you require people, developers or builders of projects to undertake consultations, and do you not approve the funding until they've done that? Because it's complicated, but we're going to look at making some recommendations about how to apply best practices around addressing NIMBY into the capital planning and development process. We also are just finishing up some research looking at the intersection between housing and homelessness and women fleeing domestic violence with a specific focus on Aboriginal women. We know that there's an correlation and an interrelationship between women, domestic violence, and homeless people, particularly women who have experienced domestic violence at some point in their lives. We know that there is an it's not a clean tiding. We need to look at the intersection of those two things. And one thing that I do also want to mention that I didn't put on a slide here today because we've talked about it a lot, but we're really it's still very much in play with it, which is a project that we call the Housing First Quality Improvement Project, which has been in development for a while, but it is still very much in play. I can tell you that me and a couple of my colleagues here the business case is finished, right? Finished yesterday. Hey! We haven't got it fully funded, but I want to emphasize this project because it's really, really important. The project is looking at Housing First program participants and how does their use of public services change after a Housing First intervention. Because if you really look at the theory, the fundamental paradigms of Housing First is that, yeah, people benefit, people are homeless, but their use of other systems will decline. That's the hypothesis. I believe it, I've seen it, and we have had data all along that's suggesting that that is the case, but it has always been client volunteered data. So people will relate to their workers, here's the services I'm not using anymore. I think that's pretty robust, but there are skeptics. So this project, the Housing First Quality Improvement Project, is to actually compare pre and post interventions and over time with actual administrative data. So we will have the actual data from Alberta Health Services for who has gone to the emergency department, how many times before, how many times after. This is really groundbreaking work, and I keep saying I'm not going to talk about it until it's finished, but I can't help it because it really is really important. And I think the timing, if we can get this done in the next year or so, will really show that, yeah, we've housed 5,000 people, but look at this, look at the system impacts that we've had for police, and then we say, well, why does that matter? Well, it matters a lot. Because if we're going to get the support, we're going to end homelessness, it's not just one department, it's not just one agency, the whole system has to buy into it. And I think if we can get that evidence and say, look at these from your own data, look at the change in service usage in your own experience. So going back to human services, the open data strategy is that human service has an effective and ongoing open data strategy that operates securely, integrity, and offers quality access to the public. This is human service wide, beyond our branch and division. It's for the whole ministry. So develop open quality data products, easily accessible open data, and to create an open data culture in human services where data assets are routinely shared openly. That's a goal. It sounds great, and there has been some other really good work done recently within human services to really, what does the law really say about sharing data? And the fact is we have all kind of become part of a culture where we become very nervous about sharing data. I think it was driven by all the right reasons. We want to protect individual level private data, but it has become very difficult. It's become a big part of our culture, and we've done some, not we, but some colleagues in human services have done some work that says, really, we have a lot more flexibility in terms of sharing data for the right reasons than we think. Our practices around sharing data have created a culture of real fear about sharing that data. And that's a culture that in human services and the government, I think, generally want to change, but it's tough because it's deeply ingrained in all of us. And sometimes there are good reasons and there are bad reasons for not sharing data, but we really have to do a better job of that. So the human services research strategy, again, think of the whole ministry as values or innovation, recognize the role that quality research plays, and in human services encourages individuals and groups to develop and submit research requests. All research sanctioned and approved by human services must protect privacy. I think you all know that. And that it must advance the needs and operations of the ministry in a very general sense. These are the high-level tests, if you will, that human services applies to requests for data. So I think that we do have the potential in Alberta to be a kind of center of excellence in terms of research on homelessness. And I really like some of the stuff I've always been a big fan of Dr. Kneebone's work, and we get to hear him again. That's the kind of things that we can do and do more of. And we really are leaders in the country in this work. And I can tell you, having come from Manitoba and worked in this field, the government of Manitoba, we look to Alberta for a lot of things. There's a lot of people in the country who are looking to see how it works out. And we've had lots of successes, we have lots of challenges, we have a lot of stories to tell, and I think that research and data and events like today are part of it. So I'm really pleased to be here, and I think it's been a great idea, and we'll be a part of it in any way we can. Thank you.